Hello and welcome to our Stay Connected to Your Workforce webinar today. My name is Karen Brett and I am the Events Manager here at ADP. Just before we start, I'd like to explain the interface on your screen. The main window is where the presentation slides will be displayed, and you also have a Q&A box. At the end of the webinar, there will be a Q&A session, so please feel free to type any questions you may have for our speakers in this box throughout the webinar. We will also be tweeting live throughout and directly following the webinar, so if you would like to join the conversation, please do so using hashtag ADPwebinar. You can follow ADP on @ADP_UK. We are delighted to introduce Professor Cary Cooper as our guest speaker today. Cary is Distinguished Professor of Organisational Psychology and Health at Lancaster University Management School. He is recognised as one of the world's leading experts of well-being and stress at work and is the author-editor of more than 120 books on occupational stress, women at work, and industrial and organisational psychology. He has also recently moved from number 4 in HR Magazine's most influential HR thinker list for 2012 to number 2 in the 2013 listing. Also joining us today is Trevor Townsend, who is ADP's Product Director. Having worked in HR software development for many years, both at ADP and elsewhere, Trevor is regularly sought and widely quoted in the media on self-service, outsourcing, flexible working and other issues facing HR and payroll professionals. The data and information quoted and used throughout today's webinar has been taken from ADP's 2 most recent Workforce View white papers. These are the result of independently commissioned surveys carried out on behalf of ADP in both 2012 and 2013. UK employees from all over the country and from a diverse range of industry sectors took part and have been asked about issues that impact them at work, with specific reference to engagement, company dynamism and technology. The scope of the 2013 survey was further widened to include a significant number of HRDs, and this was with the aim of gaining more insight into their priorities. Throughout the webinar, we'll talk through some of the differences between the 2012 and 13 surveys, and these shown on the slide here, these are just some of the areas where significant differences were noted. Cary and Trevor will explore some of these in greater detail as we go through the webinar. Okay, so let's start by looking at how optimistic employees are feeling. There's been a gathering tide of positive news surrounding the economy through the last year, and UK employees are beginning to reflect the sense of brighter times around the corner. Improving mood is not universal, but it seems that the country is looking to the future with more confidence. So looking at some of the stats, it does seem that people are feeling a lot more optimistic, doesn't it? I mean, I guess a lot of this revolves around external issues. So is there anything HR can do internally to improve the general feeling of optimism?
Well, I'm really pleased to see the optimism figures. I mean, we need that because a lot of the growth of our economies is about this kind of optimism from employees and HRD people is really, really, I think, important. However, if you do look at the figures, there is still a lot HR can do because still, if you look at the survey results, 26% of people feel more confident about their job security, but it is only 1 in 4 people feel more secure. That means 3/4 of people still feel relatively insecure. And there's a difference in age. So the younger people have increased substantially, this is 16 to 24-year-olds, in their degree of optimism, whereas the older people have not. They've stayed more or less the same, with roughly 50% of them feeling optimistic and 50% pessimistic. So I think HR should be should kind of be targeting what they're going to do in this arena of optimism, targeted at older people. What can we do to enhance the optimism and the positivity among some of our older people? Because it's not the young people where the issue is. And the other one, which I think is really important for HRDs, is the thing about job security, because people still feel, only 1/4 of people feel growth is returning and their career prospects are good, and there's still a job insecurity issue here. So what can HR directors do, HR professionals do, to make people feel a bit more secure in the work environment? I think the survey kind of helps us target what we can do about optimism.
I'd like to kind of come in on that, and again, just to echo Cary's comments in relation to overall optimism improving. And I think we've seen the figures move in terms of overall optimism from last year to this year quite significantly, from 12 to 64%. I suppose from a HR perspective, if I was to take a look back over a 12-month time horizon, is there anything that HR could specifically have done to move the dial that significantly among in terms of optimism amongst their employees? And, you know, gut feeling says probably not, that optimism is very much a factor of the economic mood music, which is very positive. I think one of the things just in terms of HR, and I think it's kind of consistency and credibility through the good times and the bad times that will help move the underlying optimism of the workforce is more about maybe realism, in my view, where HR gain credibility amongst the workforce by not papering over the cracks around company performance, but being part and a fully fledged member of the management team that is transparent, credible, and building confidence in the workforce that if tough decisions need to be taken in the tough times, or tough decisions in terms of the good times, that HR will represent the employee view and have a balanced outcome and make sure that the best possible decisions are made in the context of the overall workforce, rather than being in the vanguard during the good times, the good economic times, and then fading into the background when the going gets tougher. So optimism, in my view, is a tough metric to hold HR accountable against. But certainly, I think there are things that HR can do to make sure that they're very, very credible amongst the workforce.
I think I agree with that, Trevor, particularly the realism bit, and particularly focusing in on, the mid-career people, because if you look at the survey, those are the people that are less optimistic, and, the 35 to 50-year-olds. And I think really if we could kind of somehow engage them, I mean, they've been through things before, that group. So not being transparent with them and being either overly optimistic or overly pessimistic won't wash. You want to get them on board. It's about engaging them, isn't it? In thinking about, hey, we do have issues. They're still around. Growth is still kind of tenuous, but we're moving in the right direction, and then trying to engage that group. Because it seems the young, interestingly enough, are already optimistic, and we want to keep that up. And it's great that they are, because and given the high level of unemployment among young people, this is, in a sense, kind of good news to see that the ones who are in work are really very much engaged and optimistic.
Maybe our 18 to 35, our 35 to 50-year-olds are part of the squeezed middle, Cary.
Yeah, that's for sure. But I think it's about targeting it. Surveys like this are very good because they may help HRDs to kind of think through, or HR professionals generally, where we can target things. It's not the young that we have an issue with. It's those, and job insecurity is still around. So we have to kind of do things that make people feel a bit more secure, but also not phony it. It has to be, reality tested.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for that. Moving on now to our next finding, which was dynamism. And dynamism was actually introduced into the 2013 survey, and employees were asked to consider whether their employer is dynamic. Dynamic organisations can be defined as those open to new ideas and who are good at adapting to change, and so are likely to be attractive places to work. It looks like good news that 58% of employees describe their organisations as dynamic, with 8.5% prepared to say theirs is very dynamic. What other factors do you think affect employees' perception of dynamism, and how can HR contribute to improving these figures?
Well, one of the parts of the survey is suggesting that technology helps people perceive their organization to be dynamic, not just giving people tablets, but all kind of advanced technology and the organization investing in technology. That's fine. For me, I think what's important is really management style. That's not here, but I think that's what underpins dynamism. You're a dynamic organization if you have dynamic managers, dynamic line managers. So for me, it's about, are we selecting the right kind of managers for the period we're about to enter, or not about to enter, that we're in, because we're not going to do the growth before 2008. We're not going to go back to that. we're going to be managing fewer people who are going to be doing more work, who intrinsically are going to be slightly job insecure until a full recovery occurs, if it does in the near future. So I think it's about management style. I don't think it's just about technology. I think that's really important. And the other thing is, this survey, like the optimism, this result, like the optimism result, shows again young people perceive more dynamism than older people do. And I think that's quite, I'm really pleased to see that. We're getting some really good stats here on young people and their views, even though you read in the press frequently about young people, not being turned on and not being as engaged, and I think they really are. But management style is important to me. So again, for HR professionals, please start thinking about who you select next and introduce as one of the important aspects of a kind of assessment centers and the like, social and interpersonal skills. I think they are very, very important in increasing optimism, dynamism, in getting the right kind of people who can manage people who have maybe intrinsic job insecurity fears, who have heavier workloads, and you want to engage them. And so I think it's about a new generation of managers.
So there's a perspective on dynamism that you have to work in an organization that is potentially very much in acquisition or high growth expansion type mode, domestically or internationally. And it was a point I think we touched on last year during this, that maybe the more dynamic organizations, and if you were to use the term adaptable organizations, are going to come out of this economic kind of recession in a better state because they are innovating within. And I think Cary's point in relation to the line manager driving through the sense of dynamism about the organization, it holds true, because maybe your manager that's set and capable to drive growth is not necessarily the manager who is expected to motivate a workforce and engage a workforce about doing more with less and innovating within the business. So it's interesting that Cary makes that call to the HR community to assess the kind of skills and competencies of managers to lead to lead the workforce through these times. And again, we often mistake the Darwinian piece of the fittest survive. It's actually the most adaptable, and most adaptable organisations are the ones that can come through the recessions and navigate their way through growth as well. A question I'd have for Cary is there anything about this dynamic question and the perception of HR themselves being dynamic?
I think that's a very good question, Trevor. I think HR needs to decide who and what they are. Now, we're entering a different era. I think they need to see what is really their role function. I think increasingly it's got to be, if it's going to really make an impact, I think it's got to be performance orientated. What can we do, as almost industrial social workers, because that's what HR is really. Its past is looking after people, trying to get, the most valuable resource we have is our human resource. We've heard that 1 billion times. But I think what is critical for HR is to say, and how do we do the things we like to do to enable people to do things that actually hits the bottom line? Because I think that's what companies are going to look for. We want HR at the top table. We don't want them as advisors to boards and to strategy. We want them a part of strategy. And the only way to do that, I think, is to be performance-driven, is to see that what they do in enabling people and everything actually contributes to the kind of bottom line. And that means it has to rethink who and what it is. And, we've been so busy during the recession trying to cope with the downsizing and all sorts of things. HR really now has some capacity, I think, given that we're entering a certain slow growth period, for it to think through, now what's our role? We've got over all that. Now what should we be doing?
Okay, thanks, Cary. Moving that on to skills and talent. The relationship between skills, training and organisational performance is well established, and studies have repeatedly shown that employees are more effective when they're equipped with the right skills for the job. Now, 85% of employers acknowledge the link between skills and success in their role, but this seems to be less of a focus for HRDs in the year ahead, perhaps preoccupied by challenges of retention, succession and engagement. Why do you think this is? Should this be more of a focus for HR?
Well, I mean, I can understand HR being very, very concerned, which we'll talk, I think, a bit later about what I call regrettable turnover, losing key people, and succession. I think those are two kind of critical issues. I don't know. We've heard a lot about. Look at the figures here. 85% acknowledge the link between skills and morale, skills and talent, and ultimately morale, and taking ownership of personal development. Look at the next figure. 44% believe they are equipped with the skills they need. So they don't have all the skills they need. And when recessions occur and when cutbacks occur in organizations, what's the first thing to go? Training budgets. So no matter how much people mouth, the most valuable resource we have is our human resource, and skilling them up and training them is critical. When push comes to shove, frequently organizations don't invest and they withdraw from it. So I think that's an important point, and I think we need to do that, particularly, by the way, if we want to retain people, because you can see here nearly 28% of younger employees place personal development and career planning as top planning and skill priority for them. So if you want to retain the younger people, the next generation, that's a succession issue as well. It's not only retention, it's a succession issue as well. It is fundamental, in my view, that we really do provide people with the kind of skills they need. Only 44% they said they're totally equipped. That means the majority are not.
So there's often a question that kind of springs to my mind in this domain, which is specifically skills, training, and the employee perception that they've had a training course. Therefore, they have the skills. I think it's up to HR to kind of back that up with supplementing that with the real vocational side of learning, which is okay, tick the box, give me the theory, but also at all levels in the organization, give me that stretch assignment as an employee to be able to put those training concepts into place and get the practical application from it, because it's the mistakes we make, it's the experience we gain that help reinforce the learning we undergo during our careers in various businesses. So I think the point that Cary makes in terms of training budgets being slashed during recessions probably is an indicator of how businesses view training on its own in isolation from the development of the skills, because undoubtedly employees still do get opportunities, are still asked to do more, the point I made a little bit earlier, to do more with less, and therefore employees are being forced down that route of learning on the job. Interestingly, I was looking at some statistics recently, and the talent management agenda is and I think we have some details on this a little bit later, is very much up the agenda. But one stat I saw was that something like 50% of talent directors have been appointed in the last 2 years. So I think this is going to be a big focus area into the future, where potentially historically we had training managers or the HR manager with some responsibility for training, but a more integrated approach to talent succession, skill development, talent mobility, and workforce planning, which I think is a maturing, that statistic about the talent directors, 50% of them having been appointed in the last 2 years to new positions, is a demonstration to me of a maturing of this concept within organizations.
Just one thing, Trevor, that just struck me as you were talking is that I was trying to then think, what skill do I think that we actually need, and we need HR to start thinking about? And this is, again, the social interpersonal skills. I recently, last year, ran with Dame Carol Black. We got in touch with a dozen business school deans of business schools in the UK and asked them, what do you do about actually training managers to manage people? Not knowledge, not HR, marketing, economics. What are you doing, business schools, to train people to actually manage human beings? What skill are you giving them? And what we heard from them is we're not doing much on that. In other words, we're doing knowledge. It's all cognitive, but we're not actually doing that. So I would like to say that one of the important skill developments I think we need, because I don't think we select people primarily on their social interpersonal skills, I think we need a lot of that kind of training and skill development, particularly for managers.
Okay, thanks, Cary. On to our next finding, which is technology, an area that's transformed the pattern of working life, and employees are very aware of the influence that technology yields at work. Almost half, 45%, report that technology has changed their role or career over the past 12 months, with one of the most dramatic of these changes enabled by technology, of course, is flexible working. So this suffered resistance in its early days, but many employees now enjoy a degree of choice and control over their working lives that would have seemed unimaginable just a decade ago. What can HRDs do to further engage their workforces through technology and flexible working?
Oh, yeah, this is really close to my heart. I mean, the evidence, if you look at the research evidence, you will see that those people who work flexibly, and I've carried out studies, incidentally, because we've just done a big study on why men don't tend to apply for flexible working and why it tends to be women, and that is the case. But when men do, both men and women, when they do and they actually engage in flexible working, they're far more productive, more job satisfied. The evidence is quite clear. Flexible working, or the right to request it and to do it, has a bottom line impact on organizations, on performance and everything else. And technology, of course, enables us to do that. Some of the problems here technology is around. Some of the problems, in my view, are to do with line managers enabling that to happen. Take a look at the stats we have right in front of us. 73% of people, 3 out of 4, are still working in a fixed location. Yet nearly 40% want to work more flexibly. So why aren't they? A couple factors. One, line managers letting go. So I think we have to do something with line managers and training them to understand the benefits of this and how you can manage people partly remotely. People don't want to work, by the way, exclusively from home. They want to work partly from home, partly from home. Everybody wants to have their own idiosyncratic flexible working arrangement that fits in with the nature of the role they perform. So there's a real HR task here about enabling it. We find in the finance sector, and funny enough, in the public sector, like in the big government offices, flexible working is very good. Works really well. There's certain sectors, but it's still 3/4 are in a fixed location. So I think we got to deal with line managers, which is, I think, a really important thing. I think we have to do with the issue of men as well. Quite a lot of men don't go for flexible working because they're frightened it would adversely affect their career. And the evidence is that in many organizations it may. So we have to change the kind of mindset of employers, particularly since the evidence is overwhelming that if people are enabled to and they're in an industry where it's possible, it delivers to the bottom line.
I think it's a really interesting area, and technology is something very close to my heart, and I'm passionate about it. And I think there's a couple of things kind of bouncing around here, and I really like the work that Cary has done, identifying that employees that are provided flexible working arrangements tend to be more productive, because I think there's a trust issue there, and that education issue around line managers. So it's for organizations that do permit their employees to work flexibly, it is a signal of trust. And also the technology that businesses put in front of employees said, look, we are investing in the tools to let you do your job as well as possible. For the line managers not letting go, and I think this is back to the question of performance and HR alignment with business strategy, HR alignment and HR metric alignment with the business metrics as well. And the job at hand for HR in organizations where flexible working hasn't taken hold at any part of the organization is to help those line managers to take a look at what they need to achieve, to help them to build out their objectives and their measures, of their teams and their staff, so that they have transparency on what really matters. And what really matters is that employees get the job done, aligned to the team, the manager, the department, the business objective overarching. So I think HR have a tremendous opportunity to get out in the workforce, to reorient those line managers, to build those metrics that are aligned to the business goals and underpin those then with good HR solutions, good performance management solutions that make the whole administration of this process easy. And then the line manager sees the benefit of letting go. The employee sees a big signal of investment by the business in the tools that they have, and reflect that trust, because the flexible working arrangement does require high degrees of trust on both sides.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Trevor. I think you've hit the nail on the head. It really is about the trust issue, but it's also about line managers feeling comfortable managing people sometimes remotely. Remember what's going to have to happen to line managers. They're going to have to now set objectives for people. If they don't have people sitting in a central office environment, which they can call meetings whenever they want to and talk to them, interact with them more frequently, because people are going to be maybe working partly from home, partly from a central office, more remotely and everything else, you have a different mindset now. You have to set objectives. You have to make sure you have a mechanism to keep in touch with your staff. You have to, it's all about that. And a lot of people, that's not been the tradition that we've had, but it is coming. And it will work, because we can see that's what they, at least 40% of people want that. The surveys are all showing there's still a proportion of people who still come in a central office and don't want to work flexibly, by the way. And you can't force them to do that. But I think that we have to find a vehicle, HR has to find a vehicle to help train up line managers just to develop the kind of skills to manage this kind of new scenario.
Okay, thanks, Cary. So moving on to multi-generational workforces now, an area that you touched on a little bit earlier. More than 1 million of today's workforce are aged over 65, and as more employees are opting to stay at work rather than retire, the emergence of the multi-generational workforce is a growing challenge for the HR function. What are the main issues for HR here, and how can they best address them?
Well, it's interesting, because I did a government foresight program called Mental Capital and Wellbeing a few years ago, a government report, and we were looking at a scenario planning for 2040, 2050. We're going to have 21 million over 65s and 9.5 million over 80s. And many of these, given their health and everything else, are going to work longer. This is going to be one of the big issues of our times. We've been talking about the demographic time bomb about 10, 20 years ago, but it's really hitting us now, and particularly with the pension crisis and people being enabled to work longer for health and everything else. I think there are two issues here for me. One is, what are the two potential problem areas? We can see 21% of younger workers feel older workers are denying them promotion. So that's one issue. Are they blocking the way? Are older people blocking the way for younger people? And for older people, it's the technology issues and being marginalized because they aren't as au fait and ready for the new technology and open or trained to deal with the new technology. So their problem is the worry about technology. I think those are the two areas HR has to kind of focus in on. And one of the ways they can do that is say, why does somebody have to stay in the same kind of rate? So you've been a manager, you've moved up the greasy pole, you've climbed your ladder. Why do you have to keep climbing all the way to 75 and 80? You don't have to do that. Why aren't organizations and HR thinking more, instead of pyramids, thinking of boxes? Why can't people go up to a level and then become mentors back to the organization rather than keep climbing up a greasy pole? I think we need HR to really think about new roles. I remember many, many years ago, there was a big, big British multinational company, which when people reached 60, quite a few of the senior managers who reached 60 were then given mentor roles in the organization. Their salaries didn't go up, by the way. They had no more responsibilities and tons of people under them. Their role in different parts of the organization was to help the younger people develop and help the organization grow. And that enabled younger people to move up but it also gave a role to the older person. I think HR has to think very creatively about this issue.
It's an issue that came up recently at an ADP panel discussion with a number of our HR directors from businesses across the UK joined us at the Institute of Directors recently, and a lot of time was spent talking about the multi-generational workforce issues. And Cary very definitely is on the money in terms of, how do we manage the workforce differently and manage the macroeconomic effects of the aging population and people that want to continue to work, and how they deliver value into the business. But a lot of the focus of the ADP panel discussion related to the different generations in the workforce, the conflict, and I think Cary mentioned, younger generations potentially feeling blocked in terms of advancement and promotion. But an interesting angle that was taken at that discussion was to ask the group, well, is there different ways based on the characteristics of the different generations? So my generation is all about climbing up through the corporate ladder, recognition based on advancement and promotion. But some of the characteristics of younger people entering the workforce now, from Generation Z, for example, collaboration, kudos, and being seen as a contributor, a knowledge keeper, someone that is very knowledgeable, a reference point within the business. They are very powerful motivators for that cohort of workers. So the challenge is to HR, how do they put in place, or is there in fact a need to put in place separate processes and tools, separate roles, responsibilities, and a redefinition of how the organization works to reflect the needs of workers coming into the business now, who are going to propel our organizations forward over the next 20 years. So while there was a lot of discussion, I think the HR community in the room felt that work needed to be done, and the problem needed to be tackled in a different way. And no particular answers just yet, but a room very much excited, a lot of brainstorming around this particular topic.
I think it's good that, Trevor, that the HRDs and HR professionals generally know this is an issue. They really do, and I think this is the opportunity for their creative juices to come out, because we really do need some more novel and interesting and innovative kind of solutions. We can do it, but it means thinking about organizations, in my view, in an entirely different way, and less so in a kind of pyramidal way.
Yeah. So there's some discussion out there about the impact of social media, social collaboration, and a term, the social organization, which challenges the way we organize ourselves currently, and it's more about people aligning behind initiatives where they feel that they can make greatest contribution, rather than being hired into a part of the organization to fulfill a different task. It's very much about that mobility and that flexibility, which creates all sorts of challenges for someone of my generation, which is, well, if I need to achieve an objective, I need a set number of people to get that piece of work done, and I want to make sure I have that best set of people possible, because I'm going to be asked to do a similar task again, or a similar task thereafter. But this concept of the social organization is about letting go to say, let people find the types of initiatives and the type of work that they want to do, and it's a very, very different approach. Not necessarily saying it's right for all organizations, but it's part of the evolving thinking around the social organization.
That's great. Thank you, Trevor. The 2013 survey also featured questions specifically aimed at HRDs to gain their perspective and discover how and where HR is driving the people agenda. HR is making an increasingly strategic contribution, positioning organisations to meet the critical people challenges of the 21st century. This chart shows what areas HRD see as their top 10 priorities for the year. By some margin, talent management and retention comes top of the HRD priority list. With 17% of employees set on finding a new role within the next 12 months and 43% aiming to move on within 5 years, it makes sense for HR to focus on this strategic factor for the sustainability of organisations. It's also in line with research revealed in ADP's white paper from 2013 entitled The Role of HR Executives' Expectations, where C-suite leaders were clear that they expect their HRDs to deliver effective solutions to the talent management challenges faced by their organisations. So, what do you see as the nature of these talent challenges?
So I think it's a good thing that we see talent management at the top of the HRD view, because I think it goes back to this theme of organisations having to do more with less. So organisations and HR leading the charge of ensuring that the right people are doing the right jobs in the right quantities across the organisation, and building out the pipeline behind those team players in the business that make a huge difference. So I think what we've seen is tightening margins. We've seen organisations trying to open up new markets. We've seen a mega trend across internationalisation and regionalisation of businesses, where organisations are out there trying to fight for their survivals and fight to succeed. So what we're seeing in terms of talent management is organisations then having to invest in the best possible people to drive their business objectives forward. Interestingly, the talent management and retention number corresponds nicely with a piece of data that I saw recently from Lloyd's Register, where they surveyed CEOs of the top businesses in the UK, and talent management was either number 1 or number 2 on the CEO's issue as well. So in my view, this demonstrates a very, very strong alignment between the HR director, the CEO, or in better terms, between HR strategy reflecting and very close alignment to business strategy.
This survey is also, I think, really important, the results from this survey, in indicating that nearly 1 in 5 over the next 12 months will be looking for a new job. That over a 5-year period, 43% are going to be looking for a new job. We have a different generation of employees. The psychological contract between the employer and the employee has been sufficiently broken over the last 15 years, where people now feel, in a sense, less loyalty. So the issue of retention and talent management is extremely important. I remember the precursor for the Chartered Management Institute, which is a professional body for managers, who I work with very closely. The precursor was the British Institute of Management. About 30 years ago, they did a study. I think it showed something like, a survey showed something like your average manager 30 years ago worked for 2 to 3 employers in a lifetime. That figure is probably 12 now. In other words, what's in people's mindset, because you don't go to an organization and work your whole career in it. That doesn't happen anymore. And certainly the Y generation and even the generation before them don't do that. They look for a main chance. Look at these figures. It's showing people are wanting to churn. Therefore, the issue of retention, talent management is probably one of the most important issues organizations have, particularly at a time when they've already let a lot of people go during the recession. So regrettable turnover is a big issue. Not losing critical people to your business. You do that now when you are lean and mean, you've got problems. So I think this is a big HR deal. How they go about talent management is another issue. And there are things I think HR could do in this arena that they don't do. Like, how do we find adaptable, resilient managers? I think we just need that. We need more psychometrics and other vehicles to find out who these people are, rather than relying on kind of informal data. We need to be more evidence-based in identifying who our talent is and who are the people we want to ensure that we don't get regrettable turnover.
Absolutely. I think that evidence-based point is a strong point, Cary, because I think from a technology point of view, and it's interesting, it doesn't appear on the high up on the agenda for HR at the moment. But I think to enable talent strategies across the organisation, their international concerns, as organisations increasingly look to expand that, the role of technology to be able to enable and reinforce the strategies, and understanding what those key kind of data points are to give advanced and early warning to the business of gaps across the business is of increased importance. So I'd like to see going forward that the HR community start to look at ways of, now we understand the business concern. We've developed our own internal strategies, but then look to how do they reinforce those at within the fabric of the business by using the right platforms, tools, and working with vendors like ADP in areas such as big data, where lots of standardization is required to make that successful, which in turn will make HR and talent managers more successful.
Thanks, Trevor. With employee engagement vital to performance and a key factor in retention, it's not surprising that employee engagement sits just behind talent management issues on the HRD agenda. There is strong alignment between employee and HRD opinions on engagement issues, with them both agreeing that praise and recognition is the number one driver for motivating people outside of pay. That's good news, isn't it?
Oh, it's very good news. I mean, for years I've been saying that we have to manage people by praise and reward and not by fault finding. I think it's about, again, the social interpersonal skills of line managers. That's what they want. And this is a real great lever for engagement. But do we have the managers who can do this? Are we selecting the right ones is another issue. And the ability to work when and where employees want to, that's the flexibility bit as well. And more open and transparent leadership, not only structure, but style. So I think these are all kind of critical. For me, what they mean, and look what they're saying here. The HRDs are seeing, working harder for the same or less reward as a number one threat to employee motivation, and worries about job security. So that's all. So we have to pull levers that are going to gauge people, because people are worried about their job security, and they're worried about having to work harder and more in more rapid and quick environment, but for less reward, the same or less reward. So what's critical here is using these other levers: praise, recognition, flexibility, because this is what employees want. They'll go to employers, and particularly the Y generation. They're really keen on this, as we saw in some of the earlier slides. So real challenge for HR here. How you do it is an interesting thing. How do you encourage a praise and recognition system? There was an American company once that discovered, when they did their employee survey, that employees were saying they weren't praised enough. They didn't feel valued. So you know what they did? They tried to figure a way of training managers. And what they did, it was an American company, and what they did is they gave all managers vouchers, money vouchers, to give to employees who did a good job, in a way for a 3-month period. I think it was 3 or 6 month period. The object of the exercise was to train them to recognize when employees did a good job, and then go over to them and say, you did a really good job on that. Here's a $50 voucher. Please take your wife out for dinner, or your partner, whoever. And the object of the exercise was to train the manager to say to people who were doing a good job, you're doing a good job. And given the American way, this is usually done quite often by money. But it was a training vehicle just to recognize how important praise and recognition was. And we have to think more novelly about how we do this. It's easy to say it, but how do we actually train people? Because people are frequently told when they do a bad job, rarely told when they do a good job.
It's interesting that top 3 stats here play back to some of the earlier discussion that we had. So the discussion around enabling line managers to let go and to promote flexible working. the desire of the younger generation coming into the workforce for that recognition for their knowledge, not necessarily that they've received a promotion being a powerful motivator. So it looks like the HR community have their fingers on the buttons of what employees want. There just seems to be that disconnect between, what the HR director recognizes the workforce needs and the strategies and the tactics that are then applied to enable the line management community to be more open. We spoke about trust earlier, to let employees work where they want, obviously within business rules and responding to customers, etc. And the praise and recognition piece. So there seems to be high correlation, but a disconnect at the line management level, where the execution of training the line management community to let go and to work in this more open type style, more trusting type style that employees want. It just doesn't seem to be fully joined up yet. But at least the HR leadership and businesses have recognised it through the priorities we see here.
I agree with you, Trevor, and I guess the challenge for HR is to think of novel ways of doing this. How do we train people how do we train managers to be more praise-orientated and recognize people, to be more flexible, to be more open and more transparent? Come on, this is a great challenge for HR. They've got really some interesting things to do in the coming decade.
That's great. Thanks, Cary and Trevor. A very interesting discussion and some great practical tips and tools there. If you have any questions, please can you type them now into the Q&A panel that I mentioned earlier. I've already had some through, so we'll start off with one of those. There is a lot of talk about big data at the moment. How can we go about setting up a big data initiative that will give us meaningful information rather than just more data to drown in?
Absolutely. From a HR technology perspective, big data promises great things, and it remains to be seen how do organizations capitalize on it. So my view of big data requires a degree of standardization about what are the key metrics that drive HR, what are the interrelationships between those metrics. So, for example, do we know that a positive move in engagement drives down absenteeism by X, reduces overtime requirement by Y, reduces employee turnover by Z, and further then, do we know what particular parts of engagement have a proportionate increase in those factors? And I'm not sure we know that just yet. From a standardization point of view, I think HR data will undergo a degree of standardization to make big data achievable, and the ensuing benefits that big data will get. The idea generally is get my organizational data together. I could be a large organization, potentially pool that across a wide number of organizations, providing then the model in which you get some insight and predictive view of how different HR indicators would move over time. So on its own, I think the concept of big data is an enabler, but I think it's the type of work that academics like Cary do to kind of to synthesize how the HR metrics interact. That's the real intelligence. The tools then just enable that, and providers like ADP then help organizations to capitalize on it through the platforms that we would provide.
It certainly is a big issue in business schools now. And of course, business schools need funding to do this. We need more and more research to look at the issues of big data, HR big data. Certainly at Lancaster University Management School, where I am, we are trying to set up a center for big data, and particularly in HR. But again, we need the kind of funding to do that, and probably we'll try to get a number of companies to provide to be a consortium to do that. But this is really important because we need more evidence-based in HR. And we can help companies once we have that and have the big data around. So we're looking at a number of different organizations. We can come up with really interesting policies and interventions that could be very useful for HR. But certainly it's a big topic in British business schools, not just British business schools, globally in business schools.
Okay, so the next question coming through, those applying for flexible working are predominantly women. How can we redress the balance? Aside from childcare issues, why don't men apply more?
Yeah, this is a really interesting issue. The evidence is the following, that women tend to apply significantly more often for flexible working than men. And here's the other interesting finding, that when men do apply, they're rejected more often by their employers for flexible working than women are. So that sends a message, doesn't it? That sends a message that this could potentially adversely affect your career. And I think that's why men do. We've carried out a big piece of research in one huge private sector company and one public sector company and have published the results on this. And it shows that, number one, it shows that when men do take flexible working, they deliver to the bottom line, are more job satisfied, take less days off work, and are more productive. That's what the evidence shows. But when we ask the men who would like to apply but don't apply, they say, it will badly affect my career. I'm being discouraged to do that. I'm in an organization where there's a lot of job insecurity. People have been let go. And I think I'll be showing less commitment to the organization if I actually apply for it. Whereas for some reason, because women have babies and the rest of it, they, in a way, they have a justification, a rationalization for applying that men don't have. So somehow this is a culture issue. And I think we really have to tackle this issue because in some sectors, since the evidence is that not everybody should or wants to work flexibly, but the 40% that we found in your survey who do want to, a big chunk of those are men, and they want to work flexibly because they want to get balance between their private and their work life. And we should enable them to do it because it delivers to the bottom line. So number one, it's a kind of culture change, and it's something we talked about earlier. It's a change in what we have to change is the mindset, not of HR, by the way, the mindset of line managers, because there isn't a company, for example, that had a very interesting approach, and that company, it was in the financial sector, said that the individual who wants to work flexibly, male or female, doesn't go to their line manager and request it, even though the company has the right to request flexible working. They go directly to HR. The reason is they agree it with HR, agree the idiosyncratic nature of the flexible working organization, and then they bring in the line manager. Because what they were saying is that it was when it went to line manager, most line managers were stopping their person from going on, applying. So I thought that was an interesting one. An interesting angle. So that's kind of way we may have to do this.
So I suppose just on the flexible working topic, from my perspective, I think it just, if we think about organizations and we think about trying to capture the kind of key talent out there from whatever part of the workforce or from whatever geography, for organizations to be successful, the evidence is out there to suggest that organizations need to embrace it and then need to remove inhibitors where they want to introduce it to make it successful. So, I think it's a fairly well-trodden path. We've covered a lot of it on the webinar today. I think Cary and myself are aligned in that. We know what flexible working is about, and we saw the stats from the HR director's responses earlier that this is just part of a talent management strategy. This is part of labour supply and demand and getting the right people at the right time to do the right job for the business.
Okay, thanks, Trevor. Okay, so moving on, I think this is going to have to be the last question. What can we do to help older employees view the company as dynamic? Technology generally doesn't excite them in the same way as younger employees.
I think it's about roles. I think what HR has to do when we're thinking about older workers generally is, what are their needs? how can we use them in a really important way for the organization. It's something I mentioned earlier about them, more of them taking on a mentoring role. It's not about introducing technology. It's not about even the company being dynamic. It's older workers are there. They want to work. They want to be cognitively active. They have a lot to contribute. They have a lot of experience. They know where all the bodies lie. They know the organization. How do we use that talent? And if we use it right, that will contribute to them seeing the organization as dynamic. If we try to just dump new technology and just training them up on new technology all the time and trying to do what young people already are coming in with, I think we've lost the plot. I think we have to think about the older worker and what they can contribute. In other words, what are their assets to the organization? What are their talents? And then how can we translate that into something that will help the organization, maybe mentor younger people? You know, we have to think very, very creatively and innovatively about their role, because they're coming in big numbers. There's already 1 million in the workforce. There's going to be a lot more than that over the next 5 years.
Okay, thanks, Cary. We've had lots of questions through, but I'm afraid that's all we've got time for in this session. If you have sent a question through and we haven't answered it, you will receive a reply by email. So thanks, everyone, for attending today. We sincerely hope you found it useful. If you're attending live, your portable phone charger will be sent to you shortly. The webinar recording will be available on the events page of our website if you would like to view it again, or if you would like to recommend it to any of your colleagues. Please visit the events page of our website, www.adp-es.co.uk, for further information about future ADP events. We look forward to welcoming you to our next event, so until then, goodbye.